Well, we're talking future of work. We got to talk jobs here, and that's what we're going to do next. How can companies move future of work trends in a direction that uplifts and impacts all workers? We've got to think about like what jobs are overvalued, what jobs are undervalued by employers today. How's tech doing? Is it making an impact? Is it making an impact on the right stuff? I'm excited for this next session to be led by Dorian Langlais. Dorian's a co-founder and managing partner of Rally Point Media Strategies. Born and raised in the Ironbound section of Newark, New Jersey. He's had a 14-year TV news producing career, including working at E! Entertainment, MSNBC, Fox News, CNBC, and worked with some greats, including Lester Holt and Maria Bartiromo. So there's no pressure on Dorian to run an awesome session here in a second. We're also joined by John Teza. John's a principal at NRD Capital Management. He's a senior operator with 2 decades of executive management and strategic experience. He crosses all business functions, including operations, development, marketing, strategy, technology, finance, legal. He's done it all. He's also he's a director on the board of directors at the National Restaurant Association. I'm excited to hear his perspective on how restaurants are tackling a lot of the challenges today. He's also a trustee on the board of trustees at the International Franchise Association. Also joined by Tim Sullivan. Tim's a CEO at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. The NJEDA serves as the state's principal agency for driving economic growth, and is committed to making New Jersey a national model for inclusive and sustainable economic development. Focused on a ton of strategies, focused primarily on pathways to a stronger and fairer economy. He has overseen the creation of the NJEDA's Office of Economic Transformation, which is focused on catalyzing industry clusters. Most recently, he served as Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development, and he previously served as Chief of Staff to the New York City Deputy Mayor for Economic Development. We're also excited to be joined by Christina Vargas. Christina is the Executive Director of Global Presidential Programs at the Estée Lauder Companies. She's a strategic learning and development professional, a ton of experience in a variety of industries, from beauty, luxury retail, real estate, tech, and investment banking, and bring a really awesome perspective to our conversation today around jobs. So with that, welcome, Christina. So that's our jobs panel. I'm excited. We've got a bunch of different personalities on this one and perspectives here, from the investor side to the corporate side, to the government side, from the media side. So with that, let's kick off our jobs panel. It's over to you, Dorian.
How can companies move future of work trends in a direction that uplifts and impacts all workers? Our panel is top-notch, and I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with John Teza, followed by Christina Vargas, and then Tim Sullivan. John?
All right, Dorian, thanks so much. So John Teza, I'm a principal with NRD Capital. We're a lower middle market private equity firm based in Atlanta. We invest primarily in restaurants and restaurant technology, a little bit more broadly across hospitality as well. Spent 20 years on the operating side of franchise businesses before joining NRD 3 years ago. I'm also a trustee on the IFA's foundation and a board member on the National Restaurant Association Board of Directors.
Great, fantastic. Well, nice to have you with us, John. And Christina?
Thanks, Dorian. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Vargas. I'm the Executive Director for the CEO Global Presidential Program at the Estée Lauder Companies. Estée Lauder Companies is a global portfolio of over 30 brands that encompass hair care, makeup, skincare, and fragrance. And in my program, it's essentially the management rotation program for the Estée Lauder Companies. And so we use a bespoke, high-touch, curated approach to putting together a series of on-the-job learning experiences for new graduates, both at the MBA level, master's level, and undergraduate level, to eventually prepare them to take on leadership roles within the company. So it's my pleasure to be here today.
Fantastic, Christina. Thanks so much for that. And Tim Sullivan.
Hey everybody, Tim Sullivan. I'm the CEO of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, which is sort of the state's lead economic development agency for the great state of New Jersey. On behalf of Governor Phil Murphy, honored to be here and on this panel with everyone. We spent a lot of time thinking and talking about innovation and the entrepreneurship and how to spread innovation entrepreneurship to historically underserved communities to make sure that more venture capital, for example, is flowing to Black and Latinx founders, which is a big priority for us. So lots to talk about in terms of the future work, and excited about the chance to visit with everybody.
Fantastic, Tim. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dorian Langlais. I'm the managing partner at Rally Point Media Strategies, a boutique public relations and media relations firm based in the New York City area. I want to begin our conversation, actually, John, with you. COVID-19, the pandemic has perhaps hit no industry harder outside of the airlines than restaurants, a space that you know really well. Many restaurants have been forced to close or just shift to limited function. As one of the largest owners of restaurants in the country, how has NRD Capital tackled the challenge of keeping its workforce engaged in this period?
Yeah, so it's a great question and a great topic to lead off this panel with. It's been an incredible challenge. We were remarking a little earlier how sort of a lot of the weeks feel like they're the same. And it's certainly been that way for us. We've been fortunate. We got out ahead of the earliest stages of this and did a lot of the heavy lifting in helping our portfolio companies prepare for what was inevitably coming. And our management teams and our teams at the unit level have just been amazing. I mean, they've been incredibly entrepreneurial. They've been incredibly passionate about serving the guest in sort of whatever way these new modalities required. All of our restaurant companies pivoted really hard to off-premise in the earliest stages of the pandemic, and found a way to really connect with the guest in a way that we didn't see possible. Right? I mean, the nature of an off-premise experience in the restaurant industry is so different than an on-prem, right? And maintaining that level of hospitality is so critical. And we just saw like I said, our teams become incredibly entrepreneurial and incredibly guest focused, more so than normal. And they've been able to really help our these organizations really thrive through this period.
That's fantastic. That's really fantastic. It's kind of interesting, just staying on the topic of your business. I recall and just doing some research. There was a CNBC Human Capital Conference back in 2019, and the CFO of Panera Bread, he said that workforce turnover in your industry is some shocking 130% each year. And a lot of folks who work in the restaurant industry, especially on the kind of lower end, fast food takeout, cite low wages and limited career growth as reasons why they leave. For your industry, kind of looking broadly, what does upliftment look like for employees and reducing that level of turnover?
Yeah, so I think the industry has been hard at work trying to address a lot of what you just mentioned. I think the continued work to upskill employees, the continued work to provide more opportunity, not only within organizations, but across organizations. I think the work that Sam and his team are doing with specific restaurant companies, helping them upskill their employees kind of throughout their entire life cycle is really critical. I look at the work that the National Restaurant Association is doing through its Serve Success program, and where they're really creating an entire environment of long-term learning and the ability for restaurant workers to port their experience across their entire career and across multiple organizations, not just through a single organization or a single point in their career. So there's no question, we've got a lot of work to do to continue to make the restaurant business an attractive place long term for a career, not just for a job. And there's a lot of really smart, really well-intentioned people that are working on it.
Great. Speaking of careers, Christina, you're in the talent business. And what's interesting about the Estée Lauder companies is that in addition to the traditional internships that you find at most companies, your company has created the global presidential programs. How have you found that model to be effective when it comes to finding new employees that are going to be there for the long term and uplifting them toward a career path in which they can be proud of and happy to be a part of within the company?
Yeah, Dorian, thanks for that question. It's a terrific one because our rotational program really does represent a little bit of a different mindset around what are we bringing people in to do. So as I mentioned during my introduction, we are focused on on new graduates at the MBA level, at the master's level, at the undergraduate level. And what we really are seeking to do is, through their experience in the program, do a couple of different things. First off is to build their emotional connection with the Estée Lauder companies. It's to, from the very moment that we meet these individuals on campus, through their interview process, through their onboarding, through to the rotations that they experience, the coaching and the mentoring that they experience every step along the way. It's something that we're super passionate about. We want these individuals to really be emotionally connected to the company, because we know ultimately that that sense of engagement is what leads to great performance, is what leads to great teamwork. It is what leads to longer term retention over time. So when I think about, what are the things that I think are unique to our program specifically, it really is this concept of high touch. Mrs. Estée Lauder, when she first started the company, she started it, over a stove, just making her own products in her own kitchen. And she and her philosophy on marketing really was this concept of high touch, which really was about, let's get the product in her hands. Let's let her feel the texture of it. Let's let her smell it. Let her see what it looks like on her. And this philosophy of high touch has infused the rest of the culture of the Estée Lauder companies. It's so much a part of everything that we do. John, as you were talking about hospitality, this is like a little bit of a different angle on that. I think that they're high touch and hospitality are sort of close cousins. And so when I think about how it is that we approach the rotational program, it's a small program by design. It's a small program so that we can get to know each and every person who's in it on an individual level. And ultimately the goal of that is so that we can enable each individual to discover, to understand, and to really leverage their strengths over time, which again, we know is a proven lever for engagement and for retention. So allowing for that emotional connection, allowing for people to really discover and to leverage their strengths, and allowing people to discover, what are the different disciplines, different functions that they might be, that really might resonate for them. We, through the course of the rotations, no two individuals go through exactly the same sequence of rotations. So one person who discovers that, oh, you know what, I really have a penchant for working with small fragrance brands in the, really in the beginning stages of their growth, versus someone who might discover, oh, you know what, I'm really into working in a culture that's actually much more structured, in a brand that actually is much more well developed in terms of their their marketing strategy or their marketing processes and that sort of thing, much more well established or a bigger size business. And so the nice thing about the portfolio approach is that we have access to all of those different kinds of companies, even just within the Estée Lauder company's umbrella. And frankly, that also helps with our longer term retention, because when people decide, oh, okay, I'm with this particular brand, I actually kind of want to experience something different, they can still move within the portfolio, as opposed to needing to leave the company altogether to get that same kind of experience. So ultimately, we're about strengths. We're about leveraging and discovering them and creating environments where people are able to do that. And all of that in service of not only serving the people in our program, but ultimately serving the company as a whole and building these future leaders.
Fantastic. You talked about creating that environment. And Tim, I want to turn to you for a moment, because the mission statement of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, among many things listed, is the goal of creating good jobs and a pathway for a stronger and fair economy. So when a company comes to your organization with a plan, a request for funding, how do you ensure that it's not just about enriching the C-suite and the shareholders, but a real commitment to the workforce that's in the state of New Jersey?
Yeah, great question. And one of the sort of like central questions, how do you do economic development the right way, is thinking about quality of jobs and just not sort of volume or quantity of jobs. One of the things that Governor Murphy's been doing, so Governor Murphy's been the governor for 2.5 years. I've been working for him for 97% of that time. I joined like a month after the administration started, was thinking about fundamentally reorienting how we think about economic development and leveraging New Jersey's sort of fundamental drivers of economic competitiveness. For us, that's location and people and talent, and not being quite as focused on incentives and money and job creating, location-based grants, because those have all kinds of headaches and complications with them. So we just rolled out this past January. It feels like it was about 25 years ago at this point, since it was before the pandemic. A comprehensive talent strategy called Jobs NJ was something we worked on. The Department of Labor worked on. The Office of the Secretary of Higher Education worked on, thinking about how we can pair, when there's companies who are either pledging to create jobs or looking to come to New Jersey, how we can pair them up with job seekers, either adults who are out of the workforce, or folks graduating or exiting the higher education system, or in some cases exiting the K-12, graduating from K-12, in a comprehensive way. I'd say we wrote that plan when unemployment was bouncing around 3.5%, 4%. And now we're talking about an unemployment rate in the 16, 17%. So it's a very different kind of framework, but it's one, I think, that sort of represents kind of a fundamental orientation of how Governor Murphy thinks about economic development, which is leading with talent, leading with infrastructure, leading with location, and then the money stuff comes behind that.
Right. Question for all of you, and maybe Tim, you can kick us off with this. How do we, as a society, how do corporations, how do organizations like yours, how do we ensure that the skills that employees have are not diminished or regressing, especially in a period like we're in now, where you've got a number of people who've been either laid off, furloughed, or companies who are still paying their employees, but they're just sitting at home watching Netflix and just hanging out, waiting to go back into the office or wherever their place of work is? How do we make sure, and particularly using technology, to make sure that those skills are not regressing?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. I'd say one of the most acute manifestations of that challenge is industries, and I'm sure John has a perspective on this, given where he invests. Industries that are the most dislocated right now are things like restaurant, retail in New Jersey, the gaming context, where we're looking at tens of thousands, if not more, people who are facing a pretty unattractive set of circumstances here. And how do we find meaningful work and connect those folks with either the training they need, or at least the information that they need to find new and different work in the period before restaurants and retail and everything else goes back to something like normal. And technology training is going to have to play a huge part of that, and doing that in a distributed from home model, right? So in a normal really bad recession, you would do things like open up job training centers, and you'd partner with community colleges to fill up the gymnasium with folks with laptops and teach them what the skills they need. That is not on offer right now. And so it's distance learning for adults, while we're also kind of relearning distance learning for kids, or trying out for the first time in many cases distance learning for kids. So it's a gigantic challenge. I'd say one of the things that, as a macro theme, I think employers don't always think about the right way is they're a little more credential centric and a little bit less skills centric. And particularly in an economy like we're facing right now, getting a new credential is not really going to be, again, on offer. And thinking about the translational relationship between skills in different sectors is going to be really important, just as an equity matter and a fairness matter, but also as an ability to find people to fill your job demand. So I think breaking down some of those paradigms, or breaking down some of those old ways of doing business, is going to be really important. I think, and there will be rewards for that. Like, companies that figure this out will grab the talent that's out there first and foremost, and good for them. That's an appropriate incentive. But there will be scores of folks who are going to be on the losing end of this transition, which is why keeping up, things like unemployment and other things like that is going to be super important for Congress to act on.
Yeah, Tim, I would add to that. I would say, to the extent that employers are focused on skills, they're generally focused on technical acumen, right? Skills that are in support of a specific modality or some sort of technique within that particular business. And as you think about opportunities in training and upskilling, and within the context of the future of work, focusing on skills that are portable across industries, I think, is going to be really critical.
John, what are those skills that are portable across industry? What do you?
Well, I mean, like, you think about just sort of general life skill, the ability to the ability to interact positively with cohorts, right? A service orientation, right? Having a service orientation, the ability to lead, the ability to learn, right? These are all, what would be sort of previously characterized as life skills or soft skills that are so much more critical in periods like this than even technical acumen, right? Technical acumen, again, within the context of the future of work, technical acumen is going to be, it is today, and I think it'll be so on an ever increasing basis, available through augmentation, right? Through technology augmentation, where these life skills or soft skills or, however they get characterized moving forward, I think are going to be much more critical in how we, the worker of today and tomorrow can relate to the people around them.
Gotcha.
I'd love to share an example of, the transferability of skills, either across industries or even within the same industry, but just moving to a different job, a different function. With the pandemic, obviously all of our freestanding stores suddenly had to close. And suddenly we have a bunch of beauty advisors, people who work with our customers, our clients on a day-to-day basis, the people who walk in the door and are looking for, their next new go-to skincare product. They're suddenly either furloughed or at home. What's been interesting has been how we've needed of necessity to leverage technology in order to make that shift. So again, just staying within the same industry, but changing how they do the job. So there's been a big emphasis on moving to more of a social selling model. So these beauty advisors who already have these client relationships, they're probably already following each other on Instagram. And so now, instead of having that face-to-face conversation in store, now that interaction is happening on Instagram, on Facebook Live, whatever the case is. These shoppable live streams that are now becoming more of a thing, again, of necessity, but are still enabling that direct client contact, that direct interface with them to be able to educate them about product, to learn about their needs, and to make smart recommendations accordingly. So, to the point about upskilling, reskilling, all of a sudden it creates a little bit of it builds on their foundation of being able to have those great client interactions, but then suddenly they've got to learn how to be great on camera. They've got to learn how to be able to, to host that live stream, have it be super engaging, but then to really truly clientele and follow through on those interactions. So just wanted to jump in with that as a specific example of, again, that cross-skilling, reskilling, upskilling that needs to take place to build on those transferable skills that will work regardless of the job. It just becomes a matter of teaching about a different format, a different delivery system.
Yeah, so really the key then is adaptability.
Right.
Both the employer and the employees being adapted to the change of circumstances. I want to stick with you, Christina, because diversity is such a big issue and a hot button issue these days, and it's been for some time. When it comes to diversity within your programs and how your executive leadership looks at the Estée Lauder workforce, how do you think about who's coming in the door, how you're diversifying the talent pool that you have, and making sure that when people look not just around them, but even up, that they see diverse faces and voices and opinion, but people, going forward in these days?
Yeah, that's such a great question and such a timely question, of course, with everything going on in the world right now. I'll start with the relatively limited scope of our program, right? My own particular sphere of influence. And when we're thinking within my team about how do we ensure that we've got really good, diverse and inclusive representation within our programs, honestly, it actually starts with the inclusion piece. Our CEO actually, so most places call it diversity inclusion, right? So D&I. Fabrizio Freda, our CEO, actually has flipped it. He refers to it as inclusion and diversity, because he says there's no point in bringing a diverse slate of people in the door if they're not going to feel included, if they're not going to feel like they belong. So it comes back to that emotional connection that I had mentioned earlier, but really from the start, we look at where are we recruiting? We look at what assumptions might we be making about certain hiring sources, right? We've had a ton of focus on increasing our presence within HSIs, HBCUs, and really, and even with diversity-oriented conferences that are tailored toward exactly the kind of populations that we want to be reaching. So taking the time to not only establish our relationships and our presence within those spaces, but then through the interview process to make sure that we're really getting to know each individual, just on that one-to-one level. And again, the size and scope of our program and the fact that it is relatively small, it really is what allows us to do that. And it's through these one-on-one relationships and through the relationships that the participants build with one another that we're really seeking to foster that sense of inclusivity, which then supports the diversity that we have very intentionally created through our hiring process. But at the end of the day, when you think of I&D, D&I training programs, when you think of these initiatives that we see popping up all over the place, where we've got brands making sure to really highlight what it is that they're doing in this space we're doing, implicit bias training and that sort of thing. I think that while there is certainly value in, plenty of value in those kinds of training programs in terms of educating people on things like implicit bias, unconscious bias, so that on an individual level, we can understand, okay, so what are the changes that I might need to make? What is the consciousness that I'm raising on an individual level so that I can approach things differently within my own sphere of influence? But unless there are cultural changes happening across the board that are in support of that, whether it's, the reward systems that are really rewarding that kind of behavior, is it a part of performance management? What kind of retention metrics can we look at over time to see whether or not these changes are sticking? Again, while our spheres of influence within the program or within each of our worlds might be a little bit more limited, ultimately that inclusion piece and the inclusion and diversity piece is really the responsibility of the entire company. And so unless you're seeing that example set from the top down, unless it's really truly becoming an integral part of just how we do things, enough so that it doesn't need to be an initiative, it can just be, this is just how we do it, both within how we treat and talk about and develop talent within the company, but then also, certainly for us, how we're relating to our consumers. All of that really plays in. There's been this really interesting movement, pull up or shut up, I think is what the official hashtag is. And it's created a lot of really interesting transparency that I think is enabling a lot of these conversations and creating some of that accountability that I think was missing before. Because prior to the current movement we find ourselves in, companies could kind of talk the good talk about this is what we're doing for diversity and inclusion, but until you're putting numbers and metrics behind that, and being willing to be transparent about both what you're doing well, but then also where you might have opportunities and what commitments you're making to address those opportunities. I think that all of those are important in this diversity and inclusion effort that we find ourselves in. So it's cultivating those one-on-one relationships, those emotional connections, and that's what fosters the inclusion that then ultimately supports diversity and to ensure that we have that equal representation across the board.
Great. Tim, I want to ask you kind of that same question along those same lines. Given that what your organization does, obviously New Jersey is a very diverse state in terms of its workforce, and we've obviously got pockets where we see a workforce that's depressed, maybe higher unemployment than other areas. When you think about diversity and what comes before and put on your desk for opportunities, how do you think about diversity when it comes to that workforce in some of these areas in the state, and how you help uplift them with what your organization can do for employers?
Yeah, this is something we spend a ton of our time thinking about and working on. We just right before the pandemic, like the week or two before the work from home started, appointed the EDA's first ever Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. We still call it DNI. IND is interesting though too. To help shape and improve who we are internally, but much more importantly, focus on who we serve and how we serve a diverse array of companies and workers and the workforce. So what we're really trying to do is infuse, I think as Christina said it very well, infuse the notion of equity into everything that we do. So the governor just last year signed an enhancement to the angel investor tax credit, which is a pretty powerful tool to drive capital to early stage companies. And what the governor insisted be included in that legislation was a bonus. So it's a 20%. It took an existing 10% tax credit, made it a 20% tax credit, and then added a 5% bonus if the company is founded by a woman or person of color. And so it sort of built that into an existing program. We did the same thing with our film tax credit, where there's an additional, I think it's a 3% bonus on a production tax credit if in both in front of and behind the camera there is a diversity goal that's met by the film production. So it's really about trying to build that into everything that we do, as well as do some special purpose initiatives. So I talked earlier about depending on which study you look at, they're all kind of equally depressing in their own way. How much venture or how little venture capital flows to companies founded by women, how little flows to companies founded by people of color, and if you cross multiply those to women of color founded companies, it's infinitesimally small. So what we're going to do in New Jersey is start up a dedicated seed fund just for Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. That'll be capitalized primarily with state money, but we'll hopefully pile in some private sector investor money. And have that managed by an arm's length third party investor that's different from the state, but really trying to put our money where our mouth is, because we think if we're serious about addressing not just the wage and employment gaps, which New Jersey has some of the most pernicious wage and employment gaps in America, we have one of, if not the worst, wealth gaps, particularly for the Black community and the statewide averages, but the Latino community as well, Latinx community as well. We've got to be thinking about entrepreneurship as a vehicle and a mechanism for wealth creation and generational wealth transfer. So thinking a lot about equity in both dimensions, both the sense of equity and inclusion and fairness, and equity in the sense of ownership and driving real value creation opportunities for communities that have been locked out of that forever. We spent a ton of our time thinking about that. We have by no means cracked the code on that or developed all the answers, but we sort of declared it as an article of faith that it's something we're going to organize ourselves around and dedicate ourselves to.
Great. John, your thoughts, at NRD Capital, how do you encourage portfolio companies to invest in upskilling those diverse employees that you have, and thinking about how it affects them for the future, but also the bottom line of your company and your portfolio companies for the future?
Yeah, with the amount of exposure that we have to the restaurant industry, we've the industry, restaurants are an incredibly diverse industry, just naturally, right? From unit level workers on up, and so I think we've got a lot of work to do, within the industry. Within our portfolio companies, there's work to be done in terms of driving inclusivity and diversity. And, I think not necessarily from an NRD perspective, but from the work that then the Restaurant Association is doing with Serve Success and the exposure that they're creating for restaurant workers around the notion that this can be a lifelong career and that they have the ability to continue to upskill through programs with the NRA, but also programs in their home brands, and at the same time exposing them to the opportunities to be entrepreneurial. I think there's a tremendous, the restaurant industry is an incredibly entrepreneurial environment to begin with, but there's definitely opportunities for the association and individual companies like ours to continue to expose our workers to the opportunity to be entrepreneurial themselves.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Final question to each of you. What is your hope for the future of work? Christina, you get started.
What is my hope for the future of work? Well, so my hope for the future of work is partially inspired by this really interesting revelation that I think collectively we're experiencing in the context of this pandemic. Sam actually said something really interesting in the sizzle reel for this event, where he was like, enough with this unskilled workers thing. Like, what is that? not his words exactly, but I think you get the gist. I think that for me, my hope for the future of work is that people are able to find themselves in roles where, certainly where they feel fulfilled and where they are, where they're able to leverage their strengths, but also that those contributions are equally valued. I think that, again, in the context of this pandemic, we are experiencing this moment where the heroes are the frontline workers. In addition to in addition to the healthcare workers, the heroes are the ones who are those unskilled individuals who have actually been the ones who have been keeping society running. And so it's my hope for the future that everyone across the board gets to have their unique contributions, whatever they may be, recognized and equally valued across the board, no matter if you're like executive tippy top versus someone working on the front lines and in an unskilled position.
Excellent. John, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so I reflected a little bit on that question coming into this, and it's ironic. I found it ironic that I think the lead in for this was that the future of work is not about automation and AI specifically, and yet so much of the future of work is about automation and AI, and the impact that those two forces are going to have on the jobs and the work environment of tomorrow. But I think what's really critical and what my hope for the future is that we see much more work around augmentation and not automation, right? And so yes, technology and AI is going to lead to sort of the obviation of certain roles or certain types of roles. But what it should lead is to sort of better augmentation and the ability for the workers of tomorrow to provide a better human application of artificial intelligence. And so augmentation instead of automation, much better human application of artificial intelligence. And that the combination of those two things is that we are better able to deliver human experiences in every aspect of what we do. My second big hope is that the future of work is not strictly about work in the vocational sense. That much like there was a development of the sort of concept of third place, a place away from home and away from work, that the future of work is around a third persona. And that it gives us the time, the efficiencies that are created through technology gives us the time to engage in vocations that are not necessarily just about our primary vocation or work, and are not just about our roles within the home, but that we have the ability to impact either through social work or through arts or through teaching our communities in a way that is beyond just work or home, and that work actually that time actually carries more than just an intrinsic benefit.
Great. And Tim, your thoughts? What is your hope for the future of work?
I'd say two things. One I talked about earlier, greater focus on skills, a little less focus on credential. I think is an important sort of 21st century kind of notion. The second is a benefits framework that encourages the mobility that modern companies and modern workers rely on. I think we've also seen that in the last 4 months. Having everything in your life tied up with your work when you have a massive recession sucks. And so whether that's health benefits, pensions, retirement, childcare, all the litany of things in the world, to have those supports better aligned with people and a little bit less aligned with companies also creates mobility for workers and optionality in your career path, which those who aren't, millennials and Gen Z or whatever the people behind us are called, expect to switch jobs 10 or 15 times. We don't have a benefits world that supports that right now, and that misalignment is an inhibitor, I think, of growth long term.
Great. Well, listen, this has been an insightful conversation. It's been an encouraging conversation, a hopeful conversation. We have lots of work to do with the workforce and among employers, but the ideas are there. It's nice to see the progressive thinking on this topic. And certainly we look forward to seeing how all these different measures and other things that may come into play over the course of time really help to uplift the workforce in the near future. So we thank our panel for joining us, John Teza of NRD Capital Management, Christina Vargas, the Estée Lauder Companies, and Tim Sullivan of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority.
Thank you.
All right.